The reason we're here all today is pretty direct. We know that Atlassian has formally decided to discontinue the Confluence Data Center, and the timeline is no longer approaching, it's already underway. In fact, you'll see on the slide, both the first two dates are already passed. That means that there are no more new data center apps in the Atlassian marketplace, and there's no way for customers to be able to purchase new license or subscriptions for the data center itself. But looking ahead, on March 30th of 2028, Atlassian will end all sales activities for existing customers, and then just a year later, all Confluence data center instances are going to move into read-only mode, which means you won't be able to edit, update, or maintain any of this content in your knowledge base. You'll only be able to view it. Of note, roughly 40% of Confluence's user base sits on the data center today, and every single one of those organizations is now facing the same decision. So they either move to the Atlassian cloud or they find an alternative. So the window to plan a migration really is now, and BlueSpice gives you a great alternative here, which we'll get into a little bit further. So before I move to the next slide, it's important to note that the timeline itself isn't the only thing we're considering here today. The other half, and honestly, the part that I think is driving most of our customer conversations right now, is what it actually costs to stay in the Atlassian ecosystem, and then what it is going to do if you actually stay in it in terms of costs and what you're losing. So these changes really raise a number of real challenges for any company that's currently running Confluence Data Center. So rather than walk you through each of these boxes here, I want to focus on just a few. So the first is vendor lock-in. That means staying with Confluence means you're staying inside their proprietary ecosystem, which is going to limit your flexibility, and it leaves you dependent on Atlassian's roadmap and their pricing rather than your own. The second is data sovereignty. Moving to the Atlassian cloud means that your knowledge lives on their servers, so you don't control it. And for many sensitive industries, such as finance or public authorities or healthcare, that's simply not compatible with the EU compliance requirements. And lastly, the third is cost. So independent analysis right now are saying that moving from Confluence Data Center directly to the cloud can increase your total costs by up to more than 50% per year. And in many cases, this figure is going to climb even higher once those marketplace apps and per user pricing are added in. So that means deciding for yourself how and where your knowledge is stored, is captured almost word for word in this next slide here. So digital sovereignty means being able to decide for yourself how and where that data is stored. So put simply, that means the power to choose your own platform, the power to choose who's hosting it, and what contractual terms you need regarding that piece of software. So essentially, this isn't something you should let the vendor decide. It's something that you should decide for yourself. And it's this principle and exactly why BlueSpice exists. So let me take a moment here to then introduce you to what we actually do. So at its core, BlueSpice is an enterprise wiki platform, meaning that it gives organizations one central place to build, to organize, and to manage knowledge while keeping full control of where that knowledge actually lives. What makes it distinctive is actually what's running underneath it. So BlueSpice is built on MediaWiki. This is the same open source engine that powers Wikipedia. And we have spent nearly 2 decades extending that foundation and bringing it to a level for professional and enterprise environments. So the company behind it is HelloWelt. We were founded in 2007 right here in Regensburg, Germany, really with a straightforward idea. And that idea is to take the technology that built one of the world's largest knowledge bases and then take that and apply it to business in the same way. So we're a team of just over 40 people, entirely focused on this one product, BlueSpice, and we work with more than 700 customers and partners globally currently, many of them which are in very highly regulated sectors, um, and where they have lots of requirements about things like compliance, auditability, and data control. So you can see a handful of those customers at the bottom side here, and we'll come back to a few of those here a little bit later on and share you some of our success stories. So now let me give you a sense of the reach and scale of BlueSpice and what we've built up in the last 20 years. So currently as it stands, there have been over 1 million downloads of BlueSpice free in over 160 different countries. BlueSpice is available in over 25 different languages, and we've made over 150, or excuse me, 180 custom extensions for BlueSpice, once again, to bring it up to that enterprise level. So that is who we are and where we stand currently in the market. Now let me show you a little bit about the experience of actually working inside BlueSpice. So the starting point for BlueSpice and everything that we do is that we are 100% open source. And that is not just a technical detail. It's a direct answer to this vendor lock-in problem that I spoke about earlier. And really, because no one owns the platform but you. It's built from the ground up for teams for collaborative work, meaning multiple people can edit the same content simultaneously. Rights management is handled centrally, and the interface is straightforward enough that new users get productive quickly and without a prolongated onboarding process. It's also designed to fit into your existing IT environment rather than sit next to it. So it's fully connectable, it's expandable, it's integratable with the tools and infrastructure your organization already runs. And of note, BlueSpice is 100% GDRP compliant. It's ISO 27001 certified and fully deployable either on-premise or in a private cloud. So security and sovereignty requirements that matter most to regulated industries are covered from day one. On the value side, BlueSpice consistently comes out as one of the best cost per feature options right now in the enterprise wiki market, not because we cut corners or anything like that, but it's because the full feature set ships directly out of the box without any marketplace dependency like in Atlassian products or in Confluence specifically. So let me now dive into some specific features and what they actually look like in practice. It's a bit of a long list, so I'm just going to focus on a few here. So at the top, you'll see workflows and approvals. They're built natively into BlueSpice through a BPMN-based engine. That means you can build approval chains, review cycles, read confirmations directly into your content process without any third-party tools. We also have forms and metadata that's going to give the wiki genuine structured data capabilities. You can attach properties to a page, build things like data entry forms, and query all this data dynamically within the wiki itself. So if you were to compare something like this in Confluence, this is something users would have to pay for in the marketplace directly. User and rights management also connects directly to your existing identity provider. So we offer Active Directory connections, LDAP, Azure AD. So your existing access controls can carry straightforward without rebuilding anything. And then finally, BlueSpice is fully AI ready. That means we have a built-in writing assistant, a wiki-trained chatbot, an MCP integration for external AI workflows, and a Teams chatbot connector so that users can query the wiki without actually leaving their chat environment. So all of these features, once again, are going to come completely out of the box, and they really come together in an experience that I think is genuinely designed to be intuitive from day one, and that's what I want to show you next. So this experience that ties everything together. No matter how well structured your wiki is, if people cannot find things, they'll stop using it. So to combat that, BlueSpice runs on open search under the hood, which means it's a search that's fast, that's accurate, and that scales within your content. We also offer AI-generated summaries that surface directly above every search in our search center. BlueSpice Farm is our multi-wiki architecture that allows organizations to run completely separate wiki instances for different departments or different business units, and then the search will then work across all of those different instances simultaneously, so users can surface then relevant content that they need from anywhere across multiple organizations or teams without switching the context. And then critically, the cross-wiki search respects every permission boundary along the way, meaning that users will only see results from the wikis and the namespaces that they actually have access to. So sensitive content is then going to stay protected without any extra configuration. Just a quick note here, we offer a free online demo that is accessible 24/7 on bluespice.com, and it's going to give you just a hands-on environment to explore some of the features that I discussed earlier at your own pace. So there's nothing to install, there's no commitment required. There is simply a login with a username and password for you to jump into the demo system itself, and then you can get a feel for the platform before any conversations or next steps. All right, now let me show you a couple real world examples of how organizations are actually putting BlueSpice to work today. So the first we have here is the Federal Ministry for Education and Research here in Germany. This was a really great project that sought to build a comprehensive online handbook covering things like funding guidelines, procedure requirements, and project rules that was both accessible to internal staff, but also to external project sponsors. So what's really cool about this is the integrated AI chatbot that we helped develop for them. And this allows employees or their external partners to ask questions in plain English and receive answers just from the content that is in the wiki itself. Once again, important to note, it's GDPR compliant. And this is exactly kind of the deployment that wouldn't be possible in the Atlassian cloud. The second example we have here is a little bit different, but also I think a really cool thing that we did for a Bäckerei Movius, which is a bakery here in Germany. This project brought BlueSpice directly onto the bakery floor in the form of an AI-powered machine handbook. So whenever a worker came across a problem, say with equipment issues or check parameters, they could go into the chatbot, type in the question they have, and they receive answers in real time to then go back to the machine itself and quickly fix whatever issue they were encountering at the moment. Of note, this project was recognized by the Saxon Transfer Prize in 2025 for its success in turning this idea into a working industrial application. So these are just two relatively different use cases, but they share the same foundation. So let me now take you to the technical side of what that foundation is and how BlueSpice actually is structured under the hood. So the most direct comparison for Confluence is a BlueSpice farm. And what you're looking at here is our answer to it. So a farm is a collection of completely separate but interlinked and independent wiki instances, all running on the same infrastructure and managed from one central administration layer, the root wiki, which you see at top. So in this example, you see there are 4 wikis: the private customer management, the business customers, the sales management, and the internal logistics. Each one has its own environment, its teams, its own content, and its own access rules. So the key advantage here over Confluent Spaces is that these are genuinely isolated instances. They're not just sections of a single system, so you can get real content and permission separation without the overhead of managing completely separate servers. So now let's zoom into one of those individual wikis here. Excuse me. So inside an individual wiki, the primary organizational unit is going to be the namespace that you see here in the middle of the slide. Think of these really as dedicated folders or containers for different themes or topics, each with their own pages, subpages, and content structure. In this example, you have three namespaces sitting inside one wiki, and each of these is scoped and organized independently. Excuse me. On top of that structure, you then have books here that you'll see at the bottom, and this is going to give you the ability to take content across multiple namespaces, organize it in a structured and hierarchical view, and then you can use these books for things like handbooks within your organization, onboarding guides, or process documentation that span multiple areas. Of note, rights and roles are managed at the namespace level, so you can define exactly who has administrative access, who can edit, who has read-only permissions, and you can do that differently for each namespace. And then all of that user management is tied directly into your Active Directory or identity provider that you see on the left-hand side of the slide, meaning that groups and roles for your organization um, that you already maintain are then synced directly into BlueSpice without any manual duplication. So let me show you one more layer of how content is organized and structured within the wiki here. And that's through things like books that I already talked about a little bit, categories, and metadata. So, like I said earlier, books are going to let you compile content between various namespaces into a structured document with full PDF export capability. Categories, just what you think they are. They work as essentially a global tagging system throughout the wiki, and then the metadata. That's powered by Samantha Media Wiki, and this lets you attach structured properties directly to pages, and then you're able to query that data that lives inside each of these pages dynamically across the entire wiki. So now let's take a quick look at the infrastructure slide, because I know scalability and high availability is a big topic today, and there's a few things that I want to address here. So BlueSpice is delivered entirely in containers, which means the full stack. You have the front end, the APIs, the search, the database storage, all of this can be deployed and maintained and scaled as a single coordinated system. So the front end itself is horizontally scalable, sitting behind a load balancer. So as your user base increases and your content volume grows, you can add nodes without any architectural rework. It runs also cleanly on Kubernetes framework, which means things like auto scaling is available completely out of the box, and also high availability configurations with replicas and failover safes are fully supported as well. For larger deployments, the database, the search, and the storage components that you see on the right-hand side under common services are managed independently. So that's going to give your infrastructure team full control over each layer. So in short, this is a very modern enterprise-grade architecture that's designed to grow with you as an organization rather than hit a ceiling and a complete rework uh, when you need to grow. So with that as the technical foundation, let me walk you through the actual migration process from Confluence and what that looks like in practice. So before we get into the migration process itself, it's worth noting that Confluence isn't the only platform we migrate from. So BlueSpice has a standard migration path from other platforms like Lotus Notes, Microsoft Word, DokuWiki, and as well as other various custom XML sources. But that said, Confluence Data Center is our most common migration scenario right now, and it is the one that we have the most refined tooling and experience around. So this is where we'll spend the rest of our time today. All right, so let's dive into the actual migration process itself. So the technical migration follows a clear four-step flow. You'll first export your Confluence content as an XML file, which our open source migration tool then analyze, extract, and convert into MediaWiki text. And then that is composed into an import-ready format directly into BlueSpice. So the content migration is actually relatively straightforward part. The tool is going to handle all the heavy lifting of translating Confluence's markup into wiki text automatically. So running in parallel to this, though, is what we call functional mapping, which is where we account for things like macros, templates, dynamic content, and other applications that you're currently running in your Confluence instance. So when there's no direct one-to-one conversion, this is when we try to find either an equivalent in BlueSpice or scope out what needs to be rebuilt. Of note, our migration tool is open source and it's actually available on GitHub. This is the baseline that we use across all migrations. However, for every customer engagement, we have the ability to customize this migration tool. So it's going to match your specific Confluence content structure and the macros you rely on and third-party apps you're running inside your Confluence instance today. So now let me talk a little bit about our guided path to success when it comes to the Confluence migration process. So we approach Confluence migrations in three phases that you'll see at the bottom of the slide here: analysis, planning, and implementation, and each one of these having a structure of what separates a smooth migration from a painful one. So the analysis phase is going to start with a test migration of one space of your choosing from your Confluence instance, as well as a specifications workshop. So the goal is to get a immediate clear picture of your current system, then understand which macros and apps you're currently using, and then identify upfront what migrates cleanly, and then what needs functional equivalence or potentially custom development. From there, we go into the planning phase, and this is where we're going to get into the infrastructure. So your database setup, your configuration, your sizing based on your organizational scale, and if you have anything like APIs or integrations that need to carry over. So we can also run a proof of concept during this time to validate any of those connections before we actually begin the full migration process. And then we move into implementation. So this is where everything comes together. We set up the dedicated migration system. We run things like key user training, both on the migration process and the migration tool itself, if you decide to do the migration on your own. And then we execute the migration or guide you through the migration according to the plan that we built together. Lastly, it's important to note that this process is not done once the migration tool completes the migration. We always reserve a time for the approval and stabilization of the content post-migration. So we just make sure everything like the links are accurate, they're intact, macros are functioning or they're replaced by BlueSpice features, essentially everything you need to make sure that it's ready to go live for your employees at your organization. So one of the most valuable tools we actually have in this analysis phase, and honestly one that I encourage every customer to use before we even get into the migration conversation, is our live macro checker. So this can be found directly on our website. You'll see a link down there. And now I want to show you just a couple slides of how it works exactly. So the process itself is relatively straightforward. You're going to simply open up your Confluence instance. You're going to go and download an XML export of your macro usage statistics, and then copy and paste that full macro list directly into the dialog box that you see there in gray. And then once you hit the check button, the results are going to come back and they're going to be color coded along three different categories. So green means that the macro is fully migratable and automatic as part of the migration tool. Yellow means that there's that there's partial compatibility, and that we need to talk about what truly functionally matters to you in that macro. For instance, there might be some work on the front end of prepping it before it goes through the migration tool, or on the back end so it meets your expectations. And then lastly, we have gray. That means there is currently no automated migration path, but this is an instance of when we can do custom development to make sure that all your needs are addressed throughout the migration. And just one more note before I move on, it's not unusual to see a mix of all three. That's completely fine. The checker exists precisely so that we can have that early conversation about what's important to you, rather than discovering some surprises halfway through once we can begin the actual migration process. All right, now let's shift to the migration process end to end. Um, and let's now focus on a little bit of the business side here to discuss things like cost, return on investment, and where BlueSpice sits in a broader market context. All right, so here is the cost story for BlueSpice, and this comes back to something that I touched on throughout the presentation. Everything ships out of the box with BlueSpice, so that means there's no marketplace like the Atlassian marketplace, um, and there's no per cost or per feature licensing stacking up on top of your base subscription. So when you compare the total cost of ownership against a fully loaded Confluence Data Center deployment, meaning with all the apps and features included, BlueSpice roughly comes out to three to roughly 3 times less than Confluence. Um, and then your operating costs are running approximately 35% lower than Confluence on a like for like basis. So the ROI on a typical migration cost lands within roughly 2 years of that initial purchase, depending on the size and complexity of the deployment. The other piece that matters here to particularly finance teams is predictability. So our pricing is always transparent and it's fixed. So there are no surprises. For instance, when Atlassian in the last 6 months, I think, have announced already 2 increases to their cloud platform. So that's something that you won't see from us. It will always be communicated well in advance if there are any shifts in pricing. And now let's zoom out a little bit and look at where BlueSpice sits in the broader market. And I think here you'll see that the value picture gets even more clear. So what this chart is showing is the enterprise wiki and knowledge management market across 2 different dimensions. So competitive strength on the horizontal x-axis, and then portfolio attractiveness on the vertical axis. And it gives you just a quick read on where the meaningful players actually sit today. So what you notice right away is that BlueSpice sits in the market challenger zone directly adjacent to Confluence, meaning we are competitive on features and enterprise readiness at the level very few current open source alternatives can match today. So for instance, tools further down the chart like MediaWiki or DokuWiki or wiki.js, these are capable platforms, but they're not built for enterprise customers directly out of the box, which is a meaningful gap when you're looking to migrate a large Confluence environment and you need things like compliance, features, workflows, structured permissions, all from day one. So the honest answer here is feature parity that we have compared to Confluence, I'd say is roughly 80 to 90%. And then that remaining percentage is just a conversation about which functionality matters to you most and that you need. And in many of these cases, BlueSpice can either handle it in a different way, or we can help build a customized solution to meet your needs. And to make this comparison a little more concrete, I'm going to go and show you just a feature by feature breakdown. Once again, I'm not going to go into everything here, but just to quickly go through it. On the feature set, things like integration, scalability, accessibility, BlueSpice is competitive across the board. The sharper differentiator here, though, is, and one that Confluence can simply not match, is that most important right now is that we offer on-premise deployments. So Confluence Data Center being discontinued, Atlassian is effectively saying you have to go to the cloud. You'll never have that with us. We plan to keep our on-premise deployments available for the future. And then one more thing to highlight on this slide is the value for money. And I think this is where the gap really is most visible and that I touched on a little bit earlier. So once again, when you factor everything in, including base subscription costs versus Confluence-based subscription costs, and then you add on top those marketplace apps and macros and third-party connectors, the difference really between Confluence and BlueSpice is pretty significant. So when you're ready to move forward, here is how you can actually get started with us. There are two ways to move forward with BlueSpice. You can go directly through us here at HelloVelt, or you can go through one of our certified partners, depending on what works best for you and your organization. So going direct, though, means that you're going to work with the team, of course, that built the platform, which gives you the shortest line to product expertise, to implementation support and ongoing maintenance and things like that. However, we have a large partner network that's going to cover a wide range of needs, not just purchasing, but things like cloud hosting, private cloud hosting, installation, and regional support. So if you have a preference for who you're working with or already have a partner that you've been working with for a while, this is always an option. And then before I move on, I just want to point out a few of our key partners, one of which is Interfine. This is a service that will power enterprise-grade global search capabilities across not just the wiki, but across multiple applications and your desktop itself. And then we also have Ionis, who is our main cloud provider, both public and private clouds, and they provide a number of great AI features directly in the cloud itself. But regardless, both paths are going to lead to the same thing. And if you want to explore pricing and configuration directly, once again, you can go to bluespice.com and go to our price configurator, or just reach out to us directly and we can point you in the right direction. So before we finish here, I just want to point out a few of our renowned clients. So what you're looking at here is just a cross-section of different organizations running BlueSpice today. So in the utilities and critical infrastructure sector, we have names like Tenet and Terranets and the Munich Airport, primarily using BlueSpice for things like document control and quality management at the enterprise level. We also have on the research and public sector side, the Federal Ministry for Education and Research that I spoke about earlier, but also IT Bund, which is the IT provider for the German federal government. And then just a few more, we have Fraunhofer and Bäckerei Möbius that represent the research and industrial side, both of which we touched on earlier. And then in the SME space, we have companies like Max Bugel and Neovac that have used BlueSpice as a direct replacement for Confluence and for SharePoint or other wiki systems. So with that, let me bring everything together and leave you with one clear takeaway before we move on. So the main message here is a pretty simple one. It's that the Confluence Data Center clock is already running, and organizations that are considering an alternative or that don't want to move the cloud, the time to start planning your migration is now. So it's best to do it as soon as possible so that you're working under your own deadlines rather than Confluence's deadlines. So with that, thank you so much for your time here today. I hope this was informative. And if you have any questions, I'll look at the chat here in a few minutes, but please feel free to speak up. Thank you so much and look forward to your questions.